Good day and welcome to J.K. Michael's Knowledge Series. Today we're going to be looking at business analysis according to the BABOK guide, which is going to be the IIBA standard for business analysis. Now let's have our introduction into the BABOK. The Guide to the Business Analysis Body of Knowledge, also known as the BABOK Guide, is the globally recognized standard for practice of business analysis. Now, the BABOK guide describes BA knowledge areas. So this is how it is structured, right? It's important to remember that the BABOK guide is structured into business analysis knowledge areas, also known as the core concepts, the task, underlying competencies, techniques, and perspectives. You want to break that into 5, right? And when you understand how well this is described in the BABOK guide, it helps you to be able to practice business analysis. Let's look at them. We have the knowledge areas. And under the knowledge areas, we have the tasks, both of which would be seen as the core knowledge area, core concepts. We have the underlying competencies, which is going to be the behaviors that are expected from you, right, to be able to demonstrate very good working practical knowledge of business analysis. We have techniques, which are, of course, what we use to convert inputs into an output. So eventually, for us to be able to be good business analysis, there are activities we must perform to be able to generate certain kinds of results. Now, these discrete standalone activities are what we'll call techniques. Right? A very good example is brainstorming. Very good example is using surveys and questionnaires. All of these are techniques. And then, of course, we have perspective, which are, considerations, aspects of the areas through which you can be able to view or approach business analysis. So these are the key information, right? Now, the purpose of the BABOK is to define business analysis as a profession and properly describe or set forth generally accepted practices. It allows practitioners to be able to discuss the skills, define and discuss and perform business analysis work. So they should know the skills available, right, that you need and be able to perform business analysis works. Let me describe this very simply. Now, as a business analyst, you're supposed to have understanding of a basic level of skill set, have an array of a basic level of skill set, understanding of certain kinds of terms, be able to form a common language for discussing business analysis as a practitioner. And let me give you an example of that. So, for instance, the ability to build trust, the ability to communicate, what will be best standard for or the best practices for performing business analysis, right? Very important. What are some skills, right? Again, I've spoken about communication, I've spoken about elicitation. Analysis is another very important skill. What's important is that we should be able to do good business analysis work. If you also want to work, hire, employ a business analyst, then it's very important you should know what skills count, what knowledge and what skills count, right? So that in case you are interviewing, in case you are working with a skilled practitioner, you can be able to have some reference points. Now, business analysis is a broad profession, and business analysts may perform work in a lot of enterprises across across an enterprise, right? So you will find yourself, what we are saying here is that as a business analyst, you're going to do a lot of projects, and these projects can happen in many different types of organizations or in whole enterprises that will be an agglomeration of several organizations, right? There are a lot of areas and a lot of spaces where you can put your business analysis knowledge and skills to practice. Practitioners may employ different competencies, different knowledge, different skills, different terminologies, different attitudes when performing business analysis work. A lot of times would depend on the nature of the initiative or the nature of the organization. But what is very important is that we have the BABOK to be able to establish a common language, a common set of best practice that would standardize how business analysis work should be performed. And so we can look at the BABOK guide as a common framework for all of these perspectives, because it will describe the business analysis tasks that need to be performed so that we can, I want you to notice what, analyze a change or evaluate the necessity for a change. Now, this is going two ways, right? Yes, we need skills, we need to understand perspectives, but basically we need them to do two things, at least according to the BABOK guide. Analyze a change. If a change is already ongoing, for instance, the AI-driven change the whole world experiences, the urge to get better, to yield better outputs using artificial intelligence. That's fantastic. That's a change that's ongoing in the world. If you want to be able to succeed, you need to be able to, as a business analyst, analyze the change that's happening in the environment so that you can know how you fit, understand how you fit into that change and better position yourself for it. On the other hand, you also want to be able to evaluate. Sometimes, even after an analysis, you need to make the decision on whether to make a change, right? So again, analyzing the change will come with strategy analysis, where we understand our current state and analyze our current state, understand what's happening in the current state and where the current temperature or what our current professional environment is saying. And then the next thing we want to do is see whether it's important that we make a change or a transition from that current state into some other state. So that's the whole idea of this. Going down, let's look at definitions. What is business analysis? Now, a very simple definition, I'll just go with the definition first, and then I'll go on to break it down, right? Now, business analysis is the practice of enabling change in an enterprise by defining needs and recommending solutions that deliver value to stakeholders. When defining this, I like to break it into pieces. So let's pieces it. Business analysis, first of all, is a practice, right? That's not even the important part. It's a practice of what? Enabling change, right? Enables change through, determining what projects deserve, or what projects or what initiatives we should embark on, and how we can utilize change to make a business successful, right? And how do we enable change? By defining needs. Now, change will happen. It's very important I should state this. Change will happen whether we enable change or not, whether we welcome change or not. When it's time for changes to happen, even if the internal environment of a business does not change, the internal environment of the business will change and it will kill the business. So change will happen. What business analysis does is that it helps you to be able to enable change, steer change in your direction by defining needs and recommending solutions. Right. So what does the business need? What are the problems and the opportunities? What are the solutions and designs that can deal with these needs? Right. So defining needs and recommending solutions that provide value to who? Stakeholders. It's very important that we are clear on this definition and its meaning. Couple of other terms I want you to familiarize yourself with. Right? We also see business analysis enables a business to articulate needs. Now, notice again, there are certain terms that have significant impact for us, right? We say it helps us to be able to articulate need. Now, what does it mean to articulate something? Articulate something is to state something in a way that makes it very easy to understand and act upon. A lot of times, an enterprise would not even knows it's going through changes, but doesn't understand the change, doesn't even understand its need in the context of the change. And that is why the business analyst is there to provide articulation, to provide clarity, to help them to be able to look at their needs and say, oh, I never realized this, but this was a need. It also helps us to be able to also articulate the rationale for a change. If we say we are going through a dip, a problem, or there is an opportunity, it means we need to make a change to either reduce the problem or maximize the opportunity. How do I make a presentation to the organization to let them know that even though a change is inconveniencing, it will yield benefits? You are articulating needs, putting clarity to need, putting clarity to the reason why we must embark on a change. Not only do that, they also design and describe solutions. It's one thing to understand needs or understand the kind of projects, but then it's also another thing to be able to create designs and solutions that will solve the problem or capture the opportunity, thereby delivering value. So business analysis can also occur in a lot of places. For instance, right, if you look at how an organization is structured, right, and I'm going to go with the triangular structure. Unfortunately, I don't have a triangle here, but we have strategic level, which is at the highest level of a business. Under the strategic level, there are mergers and acquisition with fits and acquisition. A very good example of business analysis work done at the strategic level. ERP implementation will fit business analysis work done on the tactical level, and then operational support and process improvements. Right, so we'll have process improvement projects, and then of course things like repair and what fixing customer issues are all very good example of operational level business analysis work. So business analysis work must not be conducted only at the highest level, right? And then again, business analysis may be performed within the boundaries of a project. Now, let me give you an example of business analysis performed within the boundaries of a project. In the example of Union Bank being made into a digital, maybe not a digital bank. It was a time when Union Bank was basically analog and they had to transition into, a technology compliant bank. All right. Now, that was a project and a lot of business analysis work was done there, right? But then we had to do a business analysis work or analysis to be able to define the start and the end of the project. So within the scope of the project, to be able to make the bank technology compliant, savvy, and safe, that was a project. So the business analysis work was performed within the boundaries of the project. And after the project was completed, they did not need to perform business analysis work under that project again. It was done and it was closed. That explains this. BA work can be done within the boundaries of a project or can be continuous towards the enterprise evolution. An example of an organization that does business analysis work throughout continuously through its evolution for continuous improvement is WhatsApp. WhatsApp has been able to evolve from the very small scale texting app we met around, I think it was 2010 or 2011, maybe between 2009 to 2011, right? I think so, between 2009 to 2011, into the behemoth that we know today, right? And how we did that was through enterprise evolution, through continuous improvement, both of which will require um business analysis, right? So you can have business analysis tasks, perform business analysis work to be able to succeed in a project and make sure that that project delivers business value. Or you can also use that to be able to continuously evolve, right? And to determine what activities you need to move from the current state to the future state. Now, let me give a very small gist about what business analysis is and how it came to be. Now, let's begin with the two aspects to business analysis. Now, there are two major stakeholders in business analysis. There are the technical people. Now, these ones know how to write code, they know how to design architecture, they understand security and implementation of technological solutions, software, and all what have you. And these guys understand the business, they understand the need, they understand the domains, right? So there was now a problem. A lot of times, the technical people will, the domain people will, or the business and the domain owners would define what they want, and technical people will not understand it because what they understand is their own technical ability, the ability to build, the ability to code, the ability to implement, right? But they probably were not accountants, they probably were not finance people, they probably were not supply chain experts. These were the domain people, and this misinterpretation of requirements and needs led to a lot of inefficiency, sorry. And so the discipline of business analysis was born, right? So what the BA became was an interpreter, right? So the BA became an interpreter. The BA will collect requirements from one side, make sure he understands it, and takes it over to the other side. He understands what the business needs, right? I think I should be able to have some arrows to make this possible. He understands what the business needs, right? And then he takes it over and interprets it so that the technical people can build what will satisfy the business. He or she understands what the technical needs, and then it translates this information to the business people. That way, there was less waste in the process. There was more success, more fulfillment, more accomplishment. Right. Okay. That said, let's look at a few other things. So this is a very good example of business analysis beyond projects. So before the project, it's a very important thing to understand. Before the project, what we have is rationale or justification for the project. And that will happen in strategy analysis, where we attempt to understand the current state of the business, right? Define what our future state will be and how we can go about implementing it. Now, when we are cleared and the project gets a proceed, right? A good decision, then when the project phase and our goal is delivery, we're going to be building, taking our requirements, analyzing them, designing option, and validating and implementing this option. That's RADD, right? And then we get into the post-project, which is after the project phase, where we are concerned about benefits, right? How much benefits we have derived from the project, comparing it against the benefits we defined or described in the rationale. And we use solution evaluation to be able to evaluate, check, and test. Brings us to the question, who is a business analyst? Now, there's a lazy way to look at it, and then again, there is a more, I don't use the word intricate. There's a deeper and a more nuanced way to look at it. Right? A business analyst is very simply one that performs the functions of a business analyst. So if you do the task of a business analyst, irrespective of the names they call you in the office, you are a business analyst. So let's look at that. Let's use the highlighter, right? Irrespective of your job title, you are a business analyst if you perform business analysis tasks. So your name or whatever they call you does not matter. You perform the work of business analysis, then you are a business analyst. That said, business analysts are responsible for, I want you to notice the use of terms here. Business analysts are responsible for discovering. You can replace the word discovering with uncovering. It links up to the term elicitation, to be able to learn, to be able to discover, to be able to draw out information, to be able to uncover information, truths, whether they are exposed or hidden. Right? So they discover, they analyze, right? And then they synthesize information. Analysis and synthesis. Now, what does analysis mean? Analysis means to break down for easy understanding and digestion. So what the body really does when we eat food is that it analyzes the food, if you want to look at it that way. It breaks down the food so that it can be easily digested. That's what we do. You will draw out information, you break down this information so that it can be understood. And then we have synthesis. Synthesis is now what? Integrating information to create an understandable and implementable big picture. So after analyzing, after breaking down the problem so that we can be able to understand it, after breaking down the need, analyzing the solutions, we should be able to reach conclusions that will integrate what? Provide what? A net positive integrated outcome, right? From the totality of our skills, techniques, information, and what? Decision. That is synthesis. Synthesis puts things together. Now, how do they get this? Well, the information that they will discover, analyze, and synthesize will come from what? A variety of sources, sometimes from individuals, sometimes from documents, sometimes from observations, sometimes from experiments, sometimes from interviews, right? A lot of sources will provide information within an enterprise. They also use a lot of tools. They use processes, documentation, and stakeholders. Like I said, these will provide information, tools, processes, different documents, and stakeholders, meaning that a business analyst should be a good stakeholder manager. He should also be aware, he or she should also be aware of the environment in which they function. The business analyst is responsible for eliciting. Now, remember what I spoke about discovering. We are led to the word again, eliciting. The business analyst should be responsible for eliciting or discovering the actual needs of stakeholders, which will involve investigating again, discovering, right? Investigating means you will both discover and analyze, right? And clarifying. Clarifying is what? Making sound decision, summing up everything, clarifying, fully understanding, meaning what? Synthesis, right? So you would synthesize again their expressed desire. You want to be able to make sure that you listen to stakeholders, draw out, discover, and investigate their needs, right? Understand by analysis, clarify, and what? Clarify, which is includes both synthesizing and what's the word? There's a word I used. Offering clarity or what, making it very clear to them, right? Their desires. You need to understand their desires and be able to say it in a language that they can understand, right? The goal is to what? Understand underlying issues and causes of the problems and the nature of the opportunity. Business analysis is not only about solving problems, it's about what? Maximizing opportunities. So what are the roles a business analyst will play? Like I said, a business analyst is not a job title. It can be made into a job title, but if you do the work of business analysis, you are a business analyst, whether you're a business architect, a system analyst, a data analyst, an enterprise analyst, a management consultant, a process analyst, a product manager, a product owner, a requirements engineer, and a systems analyst. Bottom line is you must do these 5 things. Number 1, understand the goals of the enterprise and the solution. How do you understand? You discover, you meet stakeholders, you draw out needs, right? You understand their needs, you understand also business requirement, which is the enterprise goals. Number 2, you also want to what? Analyze needs and solutions. So the information you've gotten, you want to break it down. Like I said, you want to break it down so that you can what? Analyze for easier digestion. And then eventually, through the process of synthesis, right, you want to be able to reshape the information towards a strategy, you're devising strategy, and then as a stakeholder manager, you are driving change. You're propelling the organization in a new direction in a way that would allow us to be able to implement change successfully without breaking the organization. And then you're facilitating stakeholder collaboration, because if you're driving change, right, you're championing a change, and your stakeholders are not with you, there is a very high chance that you would see a whole myriad of reactions from stakeholders that may not be favorable to the project. It's very important that we work with stakeholders and know how to manage stakeholders. The structure of the BABOK, right, it's very important so that when we use the BABOK, which is the business analysis body of knowledge, it's very important that we understand how it is structured so that we can be able to make the most out of it, so that we can be able to study it, so that we can be able to understand it. Right. Now let's go. So we have it broken down into knowledge areas with tasks. Now, these tasks will not necessarily be sequential, but they are logical. When we use the word not necessarily sequential, it means that they don't necessarily come one after the other. But logically, after you have done this, then you can do this, right? Sometimes this task will describe activities that accomplishes the purpose of their associated knowledge areas. So the tasks are grouped under knowledge areas. We have 6 knowledge areas, and we have, if the task are 6 knowledge areas are 6, then the tasks are 30. What it means is that we have an average of 5 tasks per knowledge areas. But then again, it's not distributed as even 5. For instance, strategy analysis has 4, and RADD has 7. So you don't go in there expecting to see 5, right? But what's important is know that we have about 30 tasks well distributed under knowledge areas that describe the activities that you need to be able to effectively perform your business analysis knowledge area, right? It is also structured, the business analysis body of knowledge is structured into 4 key areas. Number 1, the business analysis key concept, which will look, like I said, would refer to the task and the knowledge areas, basically, right? Task and knowledge areas. We also have what? Underlying competencies. Underlying competencies is linked to behaviors and what? Behaviors and attitudes, behaviors, attitude, knowledge, and skills that improves your performance or standing as a BA, right? So this is clear. We have this knowledge, skills, behaviors, and attitude that will help you. And then we have techniques. Each of these knowledge areas and these tasks can only be performed through a series of techniques, right? So you want to look at techniques as the specific activities you do to perform tasks, right? Now, a task will have an input and an output. I like to say this, a task will have an input and an output. But however, for you to be able to generate this output from your set of inputs, you need a technique in between, right? So you need a technique in between. So for instance, I have my preparation material, preparation for elicitation. I have my preparation material, and I want to get my elicitation result. Then I need to use a technique like brainstorming. So let me give you an example. My input, for instance, will be my preparation for elicitation preparation documents, elicitation plan. Let's call it an elicitation plan as my input. And then I want as my output elicitation results or elicitation outcomes. For me to be able to achieve this, I need to use a technique to transform my elicitation plan into an elicitation outcome. And that is what we'll call a technique. Let's use maybe brainstorming as a technique, right? Brainstorming as a technique will help us to be able to convert our inputs into a usable output in business analysis. I think I've closed this. And then we have perspectives. Again, perspectives are a way or more to look at what or to approach business analysis. A lot of business analysis work would have some kind of approach that would make sense. In other words, it will consider things like both your approach and the goal of the business analysis work for you to be able to effectively frame the perspective under which the business analysis work will be performed. So these are the summary of the numbers. Now, we have about 6 knowledge areas in business analysis: the business analysis, planning and monitoring. All of these we're going to see later: elicitation and collaboration, requirement life cycle management, strategy analysis, requirement analysis, and design definition and solution evaluation. And all of these are business analysis. No, all of these are our knowledge areas. Each of these would have a series of tasks and will be expected to learn and understand them as a basic prerequisite, as a fundamental prerequisite to be successful in the business analysis exams. Now let's look at tasks. And I think I've made references to tasks, but let's proceed and get it a little bit clearer. Now, a task is a discrete piece of work that may be performed either formally or informally as part of business analysis work. Now, when we use the word discrete, what we mean is that it is a standalone. It's an action that will be performed as a standalone. In other words, remember when we spoke of brainstorming, right? Oh, sorry. Remember when we spoke about analyze current state? That's an example of a task in the strategy analysis domain. When we talk about define future state, that's an example of a task in strategy analysis. When we talk about things like prepare for elicitation, that's an example of a task in elicitation and collaboration as a domain or as a knowledge area. So a task is a piece of work. Very important that we understand that it's a piece of work that can be performed formally or informally. Let me give you an example of performance of a task formally. Now, if I decide to elicit information formally, I can use a structured survey or questionnaire to what? Elicit a task, elicit information, right? But if I want to perform it informally, I can also elicit by simply having a simple chat with colleagues. But this chat will give me the kind of information I need to get my work done. So yes, a task can be performed formally or informally, and we're going to see a list of tasks, right? The definition of a task when brought into business analysis work, right, is universally applicable. In other words, we've been able to define these 30 tasks as the task that we're going to be using in business analysis. So when you hear the word task, what we are talking about are these 30 tasks that are going to be grouped into 6 knowledge areas, right? You will perform tasks from all of these knowledge areas. Sometimes you will do them sequentially. For instance, prepare for elicitation, conduct elicitation, and confirm elicitation results generally would be sequentially done. There are also certain ones that can be iteratively done, meaning that, we're going to use a continuous process and keep going back. For instance, elicitation tends to be iterative. At every point in time, you will find yourself having to continue to elicit, because the word elicit means to be able to draw out information. So you will always be eliciting until the end of the project. So you might find yourself iteratively doing that. And there are also certain tasks that you can simultaneously do, right? Now, the BABOK guide does not prescribe an order in which tasks should be performed. As long as the necessary input you need to perform the task are available, then that task can and should be performed. You can start with any task, although analyze current state, which is the first state under strategy analysis, is often one of the best places to start from. That said, let's proceed to our next slide. So A task is going to be broken down or into a couple of in the following format. So when you read the BABOK guide, you will generally tend to see what looks like a repetition. But if you want to make a lot of sense out of it and not become bored, it's very important to read it this way. This is how I recommend it is done, right? Now, I draw a box here, and then I think I should make this box a bit thicker. I think I should make this a bit thicker. I draw a box, right? And then I highlight what my input will be. So I have an input. I have an output. And then I'll share this. I recommend that people share this into 4 spaces. And I'm going to describe what all of these things mean. Now, first of all, every task begins with an input. So a task would have a purpose, which is the reason for the task, and a description, which is going to be, a more detailed definition of who does the task, what the task means, when it is done, how it is done, and why it is done. That's a description, right? Purpose is the rationale. Why do we perform this task? Now, the next we have is inputs. Inputs are the things we start with. A lot of times, inputs are going to be documents, material, information, can be to certain degrees inputs, right? Now, again, these inputs will not convert themselves automatically into outputs. A very good example of these inputs will be things like prepare for elicitation. A very good example of an input will be prepare for elicitation, right? Now, elicitation activity plan. Elicitation activity or elicitation, let's call it an elicitation plan. That's an input, is our starting point. Now, the next thing we have is elements. So what are the things you need to understand to be able to? So the process, what we are doing here is conduct elicitation, right? This task we want to do is conduct elicitation. So let me stress that. The task is to conduct elicitation, right? Meaning to draw out information. And then you will use an elicitation activity plan as a result, as an input. And then what will be your outputs? A lot of times might also be documents, right? Outputs. Your outputs might be documents, might be outcomes, might be documents, materials, information, decisions. Right. So this is going to be an output. This will be a series of outputs, right? Now, these outputs is going to be, for us in conducting elicitation, a very good example would be what? Elicitation results. Elicitation results unconfirmed. In this case, what? Unconfirmed. That's the output. So we have tidied up the purpose, right? Description, inputs, and outputs of what? Conducting elicitation as a task. Now, we have elements. Elements are the key things we need to understand. We need to know to be able to effectively conduct elicitation, because that's our goal. A very good example of elements would be how to be able to guide we need to be able to know how to guide an elicitation. We need to be able to know how to guide an elicitation. We need to be able to know how to also deal with stakeholders during elicitation, right? So these are all some of the things that we would have as elements. You want to think of elements as if a doctor wants to diagnose diagnose for a disease, right? The doctor is going to need to ask certain questions. He needs to have a diagnostic methodology. If he has not gone to school, if he has not studied diagnosis or know how to be able to use the tools of diagnosis, asking questions about history, he's already handicapped. So elements will help us know the concepts that you need to grasp for you to be able to be successful in a task. We also have guidelines and tools. Maybe there is even a standard, maybe a medical word reference or standard for diagnosis. There might even be a flow chart that might say, okay, if the person has this, then it's likely going to be this. If it is not this, ask this. So there might be a flow chart. These are all guidelines. The reference library, for diagnosis, the flow chart, these are all standard guidelines and tools that can help augment his concepts or the elements that he or she knows. And then again, we have techniques, those direct specific actions taken to diagnose, right? So in other words, things like checking the blood pressure, checking the vitals. These are all techniques, right? And then recommending tests, right? So let's just use the medical, checking the vitals, blood pressures, right? Testing, and what? Decision making or diagnosis, right? So these are the techniques, the specific things that the business, that the that the doctor would need to do. And then, of course, the stakeholder would be the patient and the parents or the loved ones, right? Family and friends, right? So again, if we were to use strictly this example, then guidelines and tools for this, let's look at elements would be things like knowing how to guide elicitation, right? And yes, and also to be able to what? Capture elicitation. So you need to be able to guide elicitation and you need to be able to capture the elicitation, right? What is being said, you need to know how to capture it. Now, guidelines and tools can also come from business analysis plan, right? So your guidelines can be what? Business analysis approach. Your guidelines and tools can come in from guidelines, business analysis. So your stakeholder engagement approach can be able to what? Provide certain guidelines and tools. Maybe business analysis, performance assessment can be guidelines and tools that can help what? Shape and help you what? Direct your elicitation. Now, the techniques, of course, will be things like brainstorming. Techniques can be things like brainstorming. Techniques can be things like interviews. Techniques can be things like what? Focus groups. These are all very good elicitation techniques to be able to draw out elicitation from a group of stakeholders. Why the stakeholders can be things like what? The sponsor. Stakeholders can be the domain subject matter experts and what have you. So this is just a very simple representation. And if you can use this, it will help you to be able to organize your business analysis work into a very, very simple way that you can easily remember it. Now, underlying competencies is pretty straightforward. What knowledge, skills, behavior, characteristics, personal qualities that will help you to be successful in the role of a business analyst, right? So yes, if you're going to be successful in your task, in the implementation of tasks and the utilization of the techniques, then there are certain proficiencies, there are certain skills, certain knowledge you need to have. And these are what we call underlying competency. When you meet them in your business analysis body of knowledge, the BABOK, you would find them broken down into the purpose, the definition, and effectiveness measures. In other words, how do you measure yourself? So purpose is, of course, straightforward. What's the rationale? Why do we do this? definition is going to be a more detailed, breakdown of the purpose and how, why, the best context where the underlying competency can be used. And then effectiveness measures is how do you know if you are good in this particular area, right? So the goal of, I often say that the goal of management is to ensure that we continue to improve. Continuous improvement is the ultimate goal of organizations and management. So effectiveness measures will help us examine ourselves to be able to realize how good we are in performing that underlying competency. Where do we rank ourselves in the effectiveness measures? And it helps us to be able to find out how we can better or improve ourselves in that particular underlying competency. And then again, we have techniques. Like I said, techniques provide additional information on ways, right? If the task is the end, the techniques are the means for what? Achieving the end or the output of the task. The list of techniques is not exhaustive. There are actually 50, but again, you can always find other techniques that will fit the context of the work you're doing. There are major techniques. There are multiple techniques that may be applied alternatively or jointly with what? Several other techniques to accomplish a task. You can even modify existing techniques, even engineer or create new techniques to be able to fit your goals and the context of the business analysis work that you are performing. The techniques will have the following structure. The purpose, which again is the reason why it's very important to use this technique. When you use this technique, what are you trying to achieve? What's the rationale for using this technique? Secondly, will be description, which will be a detailed explanation of what the technique is, what its pros, its cons, right? Elements will be okay. These are the things you need to know about. These are also further what information you need to know about uh, the technique. Let us assume brainstorming in elements we can be able to say, okay, for the elements, you want to make sure that people are together in a room. They should brainstorm. After that, we may not provide judgment. After that, we'll rank after the brainstorming session, and then we will make a decision, we'll record and communicate to everyone. So these are the elements, the things we need to do to be able to carry out the brainstorming session. And then finally, we have usage consideration. Under what condition will this be effective, right? So how should we use this to be successful? Brainstorming, for instance, it does not make sense to brainstorm when there is only one person. You need more than one people, right? Brainstorming also, you cannot force people to brainstorm. You can actually observe people without their consent, I mean, without their knowledge, but you cannot get people to brainstorm without their consent or without their knowledge. So these are some of the things, right, that you will consider when you're using, right? So usage consideration can be how far people are, how expensive is the technique, what are the pros and what are the cons of using these techniques, right? We have about 50 techniques, like we said. Don't bother yourself with memorizing them, right? As you go on, you will learn them in depth and understand how to implement them. And then, of course, we have perspectives that are used within business analysis work to enable us focus on tasks and what techniques specific to the context of the initiative. The key word here is the context of the initiative. Every initiative, every project, every business analysis work has a context that is fitting for it. There might be business analysis work, generally, but usually there is a context, there is a type of organization, there is a goal of the organization. If you understand the context, then you can be able to know what tasks will work best and what techniques will work best, and be able to what? Tailor and streamline your tasks and techniques to the context of the organization. We have about 5 perspectives. Number one, we have agile, right? Number two, we have business intelligence. Number three, we have information technology. Number four, we have business architecture. Number five, we have business process management. I'm going to give an example of each and every one of them. So if we utilize if we decide to, do a little bit of implementation of Six Sigma and streamline our process using value stream map, then what we are using is the perspective we're using is what business process, what management. We're using it to be able to identify areas of waste so that we can be able to what eliminate and have a more streamlined process. Right. Now, a business architecture will then try to ensure that all the elements of the business, the process, the technology, right, the capabilities are functioning optimally together to be able to deliver what value that can be what measured and what communicated and quantified, right? If you watch the merger and acquisition of two organizations and an attempt to be able to streamline and integrate the capabilities, the tools, the process, the technology of both into one structure that will provide value, you're probably watching business architecture happening, right? And then again, we have information technology. A lot of times we undertake projects to be able to upgrade our IT infrastructure. For instance, I usually use example of Union Bank in 20, I think between around 2014 to 2017, they were engaged in a business analysis work towards improve and overhaul their IT infrastructure. And that was what resulted in the evolution of the bank that we know today. That would be a very good example of what information technology. And then we have business intelligence, right? So if we use BI, not necessarily the software, but anything that has to do with the collection of data, right? Using the various tools, the analysis of data to be able to generate insights on business data, business information, generate insights, things like what the customers want, how to better serve the customer, how to better improve our process. When we take data, analyze data, generate information for use in decision making and what improving the quality of our work, then we're using business intelligence. And then again, we have what agile. So agile focuses on delivering what projects, right? In using the agile mindset. The agile mindset is focused on every of us working together in environments where it's imperative that we deliver value quickly and respond in what very and respond positively in changing environments. So if the environment is rapidly changing and stakeholders have a myriad of demands, right? And there are a lot of changes with a lot of risk to manage. The environment is capricious, yet we must deliver value. And because of that, we choose to adapt and be responsive, right? Instead of properly defining a a plan a plan-driven strategy, we decide to operate a change-driven strategy that will allow us to be able to adapt and deliver value, right, in a shorter time using an incremental approach. Then we are going to be looking at what the project from an agile perspective. Now, it's very important to note that a lot of projects can engage more than one, right? So a lot of times you have projects that engage one, two, three different perspectives, right? So you want to be open to this in your actual business analysis practice and even the exam. And this brings us to the end of this section. When we come back, we'll come into the key concept, business analysis, key concepts that will help us understand the concept model. What are the key terms you should familiarize yourself with? Classification scheme of what requirements, what are stakeholders, and then what are requirements and designs. These are going to be basic definitions that will help you understand business analysis better. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much. Bye for now.